The evening air was cold, and the city lights began to flicker as people hurried home with shopping bags and warm food in their hands. In the middle of the busy street walked a thin girl named Lena, her hair tangled, her clothes old and faded, and her stomach growling loudly. She had not eaten for 2 days, and every step felt heavy, like walking with stones tied to her feet. The smell of roasted chicken and baked bread drifted from a nearby cafe, making her stop in front of the glass window. Inside, people laughed, sipping coffee and eating cakes, the sound of clinking cups and cheerful voices filling the air. Lena pressed her small hand against the glass and watched a young couple share a slice of pie. Her mouth watered, but she knew she had no money. Her father once told her, "When the world turns away from you, music will still listen." And she remembered those words as she noticed a piano inside the cafe. It was shiny, black, and beautiful, standing in one corner like a silent friend waiting for someone to play. Her heart began to beat faster. She could almost feel the smooth keys under her fingers again. She used to play when her father was alive, but after he passed away, life turned cruel. Her mother got sick, their house was lost, and music became a memory she carried in her heart instead of her hands. Now standing outside that warm cafe, she felt something stir inside her, a small spark of courage. Maybe, just maybe, if she could play again, someone would give her food. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The bell above it chimed softly, and everyone turned to look at her. The warmth inside wrapped around her cold body, but the stares made her shrink. She walked up to the counter where a tall man in a black vest, the cafe manager, was arranging cups. "Excuse me, sir," Lena said in a quiet voice. "I'm hungry and I don't have money, but I can play the piano for you. Maybe people will like it. And you could give me some food." For a moment, the man just stared at her, then he laughed, a loud, unpleasant laugh that made others nearby chuckle too. "You? Play that piano?" he said, pointing toward it. "Little girl, this is not a playground." A group of teenagers sitting near the door started whispering and giggling. One of them said, "Maybe she'll play with one finger," and they burst into laughter. Lena lowered her head, her cheeks burning, but she didn't step back. "I can really play," she said softly. "Please, just one song. That's all I ask." The waiter behind the counter smirked. "We don't trade music for food here." "Sweetheart," he said, his tone mocking. Another customer, a lady with bright lipstick, tossed a coin toward Lena. It rolled across the floor and stopped near her shoes. "Here, buy yourself something from the street," the woman said coldly. Lena bent down and picked up the coin, her hands trembling. She looked at it for a long moment, then set it gently on the counter. "I don't need your charity," she whispered. "I only wanted to share music." The laughter around her grew louder, but she turned away and looked at the piano. It was as if the instrument was calling her name. Standing quietly in the corner under a soft yellow light, something inside her refused to give up. She walked slowly toward it, ignoring the whispers and giggles behind her. Her shoes made small tapping sounds on the wooden floor, and each step gave her more courage. When she reached the piano, she placed her trembling fingers on the keys. They felt cold at first, but familiar. Like shaking hands with an old friend, her heart pounded in her chest. And for a moment, she closed her eyes. She remembered sitting beside her father when she was little, watching his strong hands glide across the keys. He would smile and say, "Every note is a story, Lena. Tell it with love." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "For you, Dad." The cafe had grown quiet now, everyone waiting to see what the ragged girl would do. Some expected her to make noise, some expected her to fail. But no one expected magic. Lena took a deep breath, pressed the first key, and a soft, gentle sound filled the air. It was shaky at first, but as her hands began to move, the sound grew stronger. Her fingers danced across the piano, remembering the melodies she once played long ago. The noise of laughter faded, replaced by music that spoke of hunger, pain, and hope all at once. Every note carried a piece of her story. The nights she slept cold, the days she went hungry, and the love she still held for her father. People stopped talking, stopped eating. Even the waiter froze in place. The sound of her music filled every corner of the cafe. Warm and full of life, Lena didn't see the people anymore. She was lost in the song, lost in the memory of her father's voice and his smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. Her empty stomach, her tears, her fear, all vanished in that moment, replaced by the music flowing through her soul. When the last note faded, the cafe was silent. Not a single sound except the soft hum of the piano strings dying away. Lena opened her eyes slowly, breathing hard, her fingers still resting on the keys. And though she had not eaten, her heart was full, because she had given the world a part of herself. The music that had once been her father's gift, now reborn through her own trembling hands. The sound of the last note still lingered in the air, soft and trembling when a strange silence filled the cafe. For a long moment, nobody spoke, nobody moved. It was as if the entire room was frozen between disbelief and awe. Lena sat at the piano, her small fingers still resting on the keys, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. She didn't dare to look up, afraid of what she might see. Laughter, anger, or maybe pity. Then someone clapped. Slowly, once, twice, but it wasn't applause. It was mockery, sharp and cold. The waiter smirked and said loudly, "Well, that was cute. But this isn't a charity concert, little girl." The silence broke into small bursts of laughter. The same people who had been mesmerized a moment ago now pretended not to care. Lena turned around, her face pale but her eyes bright. There was a tiny spark of pride in them. She had played from her soul. She stood up quietly, brushing the dust off her skirt. But before she could speak, one of the women near the counter called out, "Do it again. Maybe we'll actually enjoy it this time." Her tone was cruel, the kind that stings even more than hunger. Lena didn't respond. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "I'm sorry. I just wanted food." The woman rolled her eyes. "Then beg for it properly," she said, tossing another coin across the floor. The coin clinked against the tile and spun in circles before stopping near Lena's shoe. Someone laughed. Someone else took out a phone to record, thinking it would make a funny video. Lena felt her throat tighten. Tears burned behind her eyes. But she refused to cry, not in front of them. She took a shaky breath and said, "You don't have to laugh. I played because I love music, not for your money." Her voice was soft but steady, like a small flame fighting against the wind. The manager, who had been watching with crossed arms, sighed impatiently. "All right, enough of this," he said. "We have real customers here." He walked over to her, his polished shoes clicking on the floor, and gestured toward the door. "You've had your fun. Now leave before I call security," he said coldly. Lena nodded, her heart sinking. She turned toward the exit, but before she reached it, a voice came from the back. "Let her play another song," an old man said, his voice calm but firm. Everyone turned to look. He was sitting in the corner near the window, a gray-haired man in a dark coat. Sipping coffee slowly, the manager frowned. "Sir," with all respect, but the old man raised his hand to stop him. "I said let her play," he repeated, his eyes never leaving Lena. There was something in his gaze that made her pause. Kindness, curiosity, and something deeper, something that reminded her of her father. The manager hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, but just one more." Lena stood frozen for a moment, her hands trembling again. She wanted to run out and never come back, but that voice inside her whispered, "One more song." She turned back toward the piano, her heart pounding in her chest like thunder. The crowd quieted, though some still smirked. Waiting for her to fail again, she sat down, her fingers hovering above the keys, and this time, she didn't think of hunger or shame. She thought of her father. She remembered the nights when he played by the firelight, when the world outside was cruel but their home was full of music. Her lips moved silently. "For you, Dad." And she began to play. The melody that flowed from the piano was soft at first, like a whisper in the dark. But as it grew, the notes became stronger, brighter, bursting with life. It was a song full of pain and love, a song that spoke of a child's loneliness and a father's endless care. Her hands moved faster, gracefully, like they were painting pictures in the air. The cafe, once noisy and cruel, fell silent again, but this time it was different. Even the people who laughed earlier felt something shift inside them, a strange ache they couldn't explain. The waiter put down his tray. The woman with the lipstick stopped recording, her eyes softening without her realizing it. The old man leaned forward, his eyes glistening with recognition. He had heard this song before, and many years ago, in a grand concert hall when Lena played the final chord. The music didn't end. It stayed in the air, heavy and beautiful. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Not from indifference, but from awe. No one dared to speak, afraid the sound of their voice might break the spell. Lena sat still, her eyes closed, her body trembling with exhaustion and emotion. When she finally looked up, her vision blurred with tears. She saw something she didn't expect. Faces full of wonder, not laughter. The old man was the first to clap, slowly but sincerely. Then others joined one by one, until the cafe was filled with applause. But even as they clapped, guilt hid behind their smiles, because they knew what they had done. They had laughed at a hungry girl who only wanted to share her heart through music, and now they couldn't look her in the eyes. Lena stood up quietly, her thin shoulders straight, her face calm. She didn't smile, she didn't bow, she just whispered, "Thank you," and stepped away from the piano. Her voice was small, but it carried through the room like the last fading note of a song. The old man stood up and walked toward her, his steps slow but steady. "You played beautifully, child," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Tell me, where did you learn that piece?" Lena looked at him, confused. "My father taught me before he was gone," she said softly. The man's eyes widened, his hand covering his mouth. "That melody," he whispered. "It's the Midnight Promise. I heard it decades ago. Played by Arthur Hensley. Your father?" Lena nodded silently. Tears finally falling down her cheeks, the crowd gasped. The same people who had mocked her now stared in disbelief. They had jeered at the daughter of a piano legend, without knowing they were in the presence of greatness reborn. And in that small cafe on a cold evening, the music of a hungry girl became a story that none of them would ever forget. The cafe was silent, the air heavy with emotions no one could name. Lena stood beside the piano, her eyes wide and glistening, her fingers still trembling from the last note she had played. The old man's voice echoed softly in the quiet room. "Arthur Hensley's daughter. My God," he whispered, staring at her as if he were looking at a ghost. Lena looked at him, confused. "You knew my father?" she asked in a timid voice, unsure whether to step closer or run away. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears. "I was there the night he played the Midnight Promise for the first time. Your father was a genius, a man who played not with hands, but with his heart, the people around them. Moments ago, so full of laughter and arrogance, now looked down in shame." The woman who had mocked Lena clasped her hands together nervously. The waiter bit his lip, and even the manager shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. They had insulted a starving girl who carried the blood of a legend, and now the weight of their cruelty pressed down like a heavy curtain. But Lena wasn't thinking about them. Her mind drifted back to her father, his gentle smile, his voice that always carried warmth even in the darkest nights. She remembered the way he used to guide her tiny hands over the keys, saying softly, "Let the piano breathe through you, Lena. Don't just play it, or feel it." Her throat tightened as she whispered. "He used to say music could feed the soul. I never thought it would have to feed my body, too." The old man's eyes softened. He motioned for her to sit down again. "Play one more time," he said. "Play something of your own," Lena hesitated, her gaze flickering to the manager, who looked uncertain but said nothing. Then she nodded, pulling the bench closer and sitting with quiet grace. Her hands hovered above the piano, trembling at first, then steady. This time, she didn't play one of her father's pieces. She played her own, a melody that had been hiding inside her heart all these years. Born from hunger, loneliness, and love, the first few notes were gentle, fragile like raindrops on a window, but then they grew stronger, flowing into something fierce and full of life. Every chord told a story, of nights sleeping on cold streets, of whispered lullabies she sang to herself, of the warmth she still felt when she thought of her father. The cafe melted away around her. She didn't see the tables or the stairs anymore. Only memories and her father laughing, her mother humming softly, their small home glowing with candlelight. Her fingers moved faster now, her eyes half closed, the rhythm pulling her deeper into a world of sound and emotion. The people in the cafe sat spellbound, afraid to breathe too loudly. Some began to cry quietly, not understanding why, only knowing that the music was stirring something deep inside them. The woman with the lipstick covered her face with her hands, tears dripping between her fingers. The waiter stood still, his jaw clenched, his earlier smirk replaced with guilt. Even the manager, who had mocked Lena's courage, leaned against the counter, staring at her as if she were performing magic. When the final note came, Lena's hands fell into her lap, and she sat still, her chest rising and falling, her heart pounding like the beat of wings trying to break free. No one clapped this time. They couldn't. The silence was too sacred, too full of meaning. Then the old man stepped forward, his eyes shining. Your father would be proud, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have his gift. And his fire. Lena looked down, wiping a tear from her cheek. He always said music was the only thing that never leaves you, she whispered. He was right. The old man nodded, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small envelope and handed it to her. I'm Professor Martin Hale, he said. I teach at the Royal Conservatory, and I knew your father well. He was one of our brightest stars, and you belong there too, Lena blinked in disbelief. Me? But I have nothing. No money, no home. The professor interrupted gently. You have something far greater. A gift that can't be bought or taught. He turned to the cafe crowd, his voice now filled with quiet anger. And shame on all of you. For laughing at her. The people lowered their heads, too embarrassed to meet his eyes. Lena felt a tear slide down her cheek, not from pain this time, but from something she hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. Professor Hale smiled kindly. Come see me tomorrow, he said. We'll make sure you never have to play for food again. He left some money on the counter and turned to go, but before he stepped outside, he looked back and said softly, Keep playing, Lena. Your music will change lives. When the door closed behind him, the cafe remained quiet. No one spoke, no one laughed. The manager finally came forward with a bowl of warm soup and some bread. Setting it in front of her without saying a word, Lena hesitated for a moment, then whispered, Thank you, and began to eat slowly. The warmth of the food spread through her body, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel empty. Outside, snow began to fall, the white flakes drifting past the window like tiny ghosts. Lena looked out and smiled faintly. The piano still beside her, silent now but full of promise. She had come in hungry and humiliated, but she was leaving with something far more precious and a second chance. And though the world had been cruel, her music had opened a door that even hunger couldn't close. That night, as she walked into the cold again, her stomach full and her heart burning with quiet strength, she whispered to the stars, Dad, I played for you today. And they finally listened. The next morning arrived with a pale golden glow. The city waking slowly beneath a soft layer of frost. Lena sat on a park bench, her thin coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her fingers tucked under her arms for warmth. The night had been long and cold, but her heart felt strangely alive every time she closed her eyes. She could still hear the piano echoing in her mind. She thought about the old man, Professor Hale, his gentle voice, his kind eyes, the way he looked at her as if she was someone important. For years she had been invisible, a shadow moving through the streets, and now for the first time someone had truly seen her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small envelope he had given her. She had been too afraid to open it last night, afraid it was just another empty promise. Now, with trembling fingers, she tore it open. Inside was a note written in elegant handwriting, and a crisp $20 bill, the note said. Meet me at the Royal Conservatory at 10 a.m. You have a gift. Lena, let's bring it to the world. Professor M. Hale. Her heart leapt. A smile spread across her face before she could stop it. She whispered softly. He meant it, and tucked the letter back safely. For the first time in years, she felt a purpose, something more than just surviving. She stood up, brushed the frost off her skirt, and began walking toward the grand building she had only ever seen from afar. The Royal Conservatory stood like a palace of music, tall windows glittering in the sunlight, its marble steps leading up to heavy oak doors. Lena hesitated at the entrance. Her worn shoes and thin coat looked painfully out of place among the elegant students carrying instruments and books. Some of them glanced at her, whispering softly, their eyes full of curiosity, maybe even judgment. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The air inside was warm and filled with the faint scent of polished wood and sheet music. The sound of pianos, violins, and voices filled the halls like a living symphony. She followed the sound until she reached a large practice room where Professor Hale stood beside a grand piano, talking to a group of students. When he saw her, his face brightened. Ah, Lena, he said warmly, waving her in. You came. I wasn't sure if you would. She stepped inside shyly. I almost didn't, she admitted. I thought maybe I dreamed everything. He chuckled softly. No dream, my dear, not this time. The students turned to look at her, some surprised, others amused. They saw a thin girl in second-hand clothes standing beside their professor and wondered who she was. This, Professor Hale said proudly, is Lena Hensley. daughter of the late Arthur Hensley. A ripple of shock ran through the group. A few gasped quietly. One boy whispered, "The Arthur Hensley?" Lena blushed, her eyes lowering. "I don't want people to think I'm special because of him," she said softly. "I want to be good because of me." Professor Hale smiled at that, his eyes shining. "And that," he said, "is exactly why you will be." He guided her to the piano. "Play something," he said gently. "Anything that feels true." Her hands hovered over the keys again, that same nervous energy bubbling up. But this time it felt different. Not fear, but excitement. She began to play, her fingers flowing like water, her body swaying with the rhythm, the notes rising and falling like a heartbeat. The room filled with music so pure that even the skeptical students forgot to breathe. When she finished, silence hung in the air. Then one of the girls whispered, "That was incredible." Professor Hale nodded proudly. "You see," he said softly, "music doesn't come from wealth or comfort. It comes from the soul, and hers has lived 1,000 stories." From that day, Lena began to study under Professor Hale, not as a student on paper, but as his protege. She practiced from sunrise until nightfall, her fingers growing strong again, her heart learning to trust joy. Sometimes, she would sneak into the empty halls after dark and play softly to herself, the sound echoing like whispers from her past. One evening as she practiced, Professor Hale entered quietly, carrying a small box. "You've earned this," he said with a smile, handing it to her. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a music note, engraved with the words, "To play is to live." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful," she said, touching it gently. "It reminds me of him." "I know," Hale said softly. "I was there the day your father wore the same pendant before his final concert. He believed the same thing you do, that music was a heartbeat shared with the world. From then on, every time Lena played, she wore the pendant. It gave her courage. It reminded her that her father was still with her, somewhere between every note." News of the mystery girl at the conservatory began to spread. Some called her the street pianist, others the lost daughter of music. Videos of her cafe performance had already reached social media. People were sharing her story without even knowing her name. And one evening, when she returned to the cafe that had once mocked her, she found the same piano standing near the window, only now there was a small plaque on it. It read, "In honor of Lena Hensley, who reminded us what true music sounds like." Her eyes filled with tears as she touched the keys again, the same ones that had once been her only hope. But now she wasn't playing for food. She was playing for love, for memory, for life itself. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and people stopped to listen through the glass, drawn by the haunting melody of a girl who had once been hungry, but now was full of purpose, full of music, full of her father's spirit. And as the night deepened, the cafe, once filled with laughter and cruelty, became a temple of silence and awe, because the world had learned what it meant to truly listen. And Lena had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not a meal, not pity, but a place where her heart could finally sing. The night of Lena's first public performance came sooner than anyone expected. The Royal Conservatory was hosting a charity gala, an elegant event filled with shimmering dresses, tuxedos, and the scent of roses drifting through the air. Outside, expensive cars lined the street, their headlights glinting against the marble steps of the grand hall. Inside, guests laughed and clinked glasses, unaware that the star of the night was a girl who had once begged for food. Backstage, Lena stood before a mirror, her reflection both familiar and strange. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a simple white dress that Professor Hale had bought her, its fabric soft and light against her skin. She traced her fingers over the small silver pendant resting near her heart, the music note gleaming under the stage light. Her father's words whispered in her memory, "When you play, don't try to impress the world. Try to touch it." She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, the murmur of the crowd muffled behind the heavy curtain. Professor Hale approached quietly, his warm smile steadying her trembling hands. "Are you ready, Lena?" he asked softly. "They're waiting for you." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and excitement. "What if they don't like it?" she whispered. He chuckled gently. "Music doesn't need everyone to like it. It just needs someone to feel it." Those words settled in her heart like a soft light, and she nodded. "Then I'll make them feel," she said. As the curtain rose, the audience turned silent. A single spotlight shone on Lena as she walked to the grand piano. The room so quiet she could hear her heartbeat. She sat down gracefully, the hush of anticipation hanging heavy. Then she pressed the first key, and the hall came alive. The sound was soft and haunting, like the whisper of a story long forgotten. Each note was a piece of her life. The hunger, the loneliness, the night she stood in that cafe begging to play. Her music rose like a wave, carrying both pain and beauty, touching hearts that had long been untouched. People leaned forward, drawn into her melody. An elegant woman in the front row closed her eyes, tears forming. A young boy, sitting beside his father, stopped fidgeting and listened as if he'd never heard anything so pure. Even the servers in the back of the hall stood still, their trays forgotten. And among the audience sat faces from her past. The cafe manager, the waiter, and the woman with the red lipstick. They had come after seeing her story in the papers, curiosity bringing them to the concert hall they once believed she'd never enter. Now as they listened, shame washed over them like cold rain. The same hands that once mocked her now clutched tissues, their laughter replaced with tears. When Lena finished the piece, the final chord lingered in the air like the last breath of a dream. For a moment, silence, deep and heavy, filled the hall. Then applause erupted, thunderous and endless. Echoing against the golden ceiling, people stood, clapping, cheering, some even shouting her name. Lena sat there stunned, her chest rising with shaky breaths, her eyes wet. She had never imagined this, that her music, born from pain, could bring so much light. Professor Hale stepped onto the stage, his eyes shining proudly, and took her hand, raising it high as the applause grew louder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight you have not only heard the music of Lena Hensley, you have heard the spirit of her father live again through her." A gasp ran through the audience, followed by murmurs of recognition. Several older guests looked at each other in disbelief, whispering, "Arthur Hensley's daughter?" The same woman from the cafe pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. I didn't know who she was," she whispered. The manager lowered his head, unable to look at her. Lena stood there under the light, her heart aching with emotion. She looked out at the sea of faces and said softly, "My father always said music could feed the soul," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "But when I lost him, I forgot how to listen to it. I forgot how to believe." She paused, taking a breath, her eyes finding Professor Hale in the wings, smiling encouragingly. "Until one night," she continued, "when I was so hungry that I played not for applause, not for pride, but just for food. And for a moment I remembered why I loved music." The audience was silent, their hearts caught in her words. "I didn't know that night would bring me here," she said softly. "But maybe sometimes the world breaks you just enough to help you hear your own song again." The crowd rose once more, clapping louder than before, a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. When Lena left the stage, tears streaming down her face, Professor Hale was waiting with open arms. "You did it, my dear," he whispered, hugging her tightly. "You didn't just play music tonight, you gave it back to the world." Lena smiled through her tears. I finally understand what my father meant." Later that evening, as the gala came to an end, a woman approached her backstage, the same one who had mocked her in the cafe. She held out a small bouquet of flowers, her voice trembling. "I don't deserve to give you these," she said, "but I wanted to say I'm sorry." Lena looked at her gently, then smiled. "It's okay," she said softly. "You helped me find my strength, even if you didn't mean to." The woman broke down crying, and Lena hugged her quietly, the past washing away like old dust. As the lights dimmed and the last guests left, Lena sat once more at the piano alone. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, the silver pendant glinting against her dress. Outside, snowflakes drifted down like soft applause from the heavens. She whispered into the stillness, "Dad, they finally heard us." And as the soft echo of her music filled the empty hall, it felt as if somewhere, beyond time and sound, her father was listening too, smiling, proud and at peace. The morning after her breathtaking performance at the Royal Conservatory felt unreal to Lena. The world outside looked the same streets, the same gray clouds, the same cold breeze. But everything inside her had changed. She woke in a small guest room Professor Hale had arranged for her near the conservatory. The first real bed she had slept in for months. The sheets were soft and smelled faintly of lavender. And for the first time in a long while, She woke not to hunger but to peace as she sat up. Sunlight streamed through the window, spilling across her face like a warm blessing. Her silver pendant caught the light, glimmering softly. Her father's reminder still close to her heart. She smiled, remembering the thunderous applause, the tears in the audience, the kindness in Professor Hale's eyes. But beneath the joy, a strange feeling stirred. A quiet, haunting ache, she whispered. "I wish you had been there, Dad." And for a moment, her chest tightened with longing. Though she had found success, she still missed the gentle voice that once guided her hands across the piano keys. She got dressed quickly and stepped outside, the world buzzing with new energy. People passing by were holding newspapers, and to her shock, her own face was on the front page. The headline read, "From Hunger to Harmony, the homeless girl who touched the world with music." Lena froze, staring at it, her heart thumping wildly. She had never imagined her story would travel beyond the cafe, beyond the stage, beyond the city. A vendor nearby recognized her and smiled warmly. "You're the girl from the paper, aren't you?" He said. "You played like an angel." Lena blushed. "Thank you," she said shyly, still not used to being seen as someone special. As she walked down the street, she heard her music playing faintly from a shop radio, a recording from the gala that had gone viral overnight. People had uploaded videos, and millions had watched the story of the girl who once played for food. Comments poured in. "She's proof that talent can come from anywhere." I cried watching this. Her music healed me. Lena felt overwhelmed, her hands trembling slightly. It was as if the world had suddenly opened its heart to her. But fame, she soon learned, came with a strange kind of weight. By the time she reached the conservatory, reporters were waiting outside, flashes from cameras lighting up her face. They shouted question, "Lena, how does it feel to be a star? Were you really homeless? Do you plan to record an album?" She froze, unsure what to say, the noise dizzying her. Professor Hale appeared at the door and gently put his arm around her, shielding her from the chaos. "That's enough for now," he told the reporters firmly. He led her inside, his voice calm. "Let them talk," he said kindly. "You don't owe the world answers, you owe it music." She smiled faintly, comforted by his words inside. The students she once admired now greeted her with admiration and respect. They wanted to sit beside her, ask her about her father, her music, her life. But Lena never boasted. She only said, "It was the piano that saved me," and left it at that. She spent her days practicing harder than ever, learning new compositions, refining her touch. Sometimes she would play late into the night, long after everyone had gone home. The janitor would pause his work to listen, saying, "You make even silence sound beautiful." But while her talent grew, her fame grew faster. Offers began to flood in, invitations to perform on television, record deals, concert tours, interviews. Lena felt dizzy reading them all, unsure how to handle this new world that wanted a piece of her. Professor Hale watched quietly, proud yet protective one evening. As they sat together in his office, he said gently, "Lena, fame can lift you or break you. It depends on what you serve, the music or the applause." She looked at him thoughtfully. "I just want to play like my father did," she said softly. "I don't care about the cameras." He smiled. "Then you'll be fine, my dear." But not everyone saw her with kindness. Some jealous students whispered that she didn't deserve her success, that she got attention only because of her story. Lena heard the whispers and they stung, but she refused to let them break her. She poured her pain back into her music, letting every cruel word become a note, every doubt become a chord, and the more she played, the more her soul shone through. One day, she received a letter in the mail, thick paper, with elegant handwriting. It was from a prestigious orchestra in Vienna, inviting her to perform her father's piece, The Midnight Promise, on the world stage. Her hands shook as she read it, tears filling her eyes. She ran to find Professor Hale. Waving the letter, "They want me to play it, his song in Vienna." He laughed joyfully, his eyes misting. "Arthur's music will live again through you," he said proudly. "And this time the whole world will hear it." Lena hugged him tightly, her heart overflowing that night. As she sat by her window, the city lights twinkling below, she took out the silver pendant and held it close. She whispered, "Dad, your promise is still alive." Her reflection in the glass showed not the frightened girl from the cafe, but a young woman with fire in her eyes, yet deep down, She knew she was still the same, still that hungry child who had played for bread but found a dream instead. And though the world now called her a prodigy, she only thought of herself as a daughter keeping her father's song alive. The next day she began preparing for Vienna, practicing the midnight promise with all the love and pain in her heart. Each note carried a story, her hunger, her humiliation, her rebirth, and as her fingers moved across the keys, the sound grew fuller, richer, alive with hope. By the time the last note faded, Lena whispered softly, "This time, Dad, the whole world will listen." Outside, the wind swept through the city, carrying her melody into the night, a song of redemption, memory, and love that refused to die. The night of the Vienna performance arrived like a dream wrapped in golden light. Snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, glittering like tiny stars as they fell upon the cobblestone streets. Lena stood backstage in the grand concert hall, her heart racing, her palms cold, her breath trembling with both fear and excitement. The hall beyond the curtain was filled with people from every corner of the world. Critics, musicians, composers, lovers of music, all waiting to witness the return of a song long thought lost. The Midnight Promise, her father's masterpiece, once performed only by him, now to be played by his daughter. Lena touched the silver pendant resting near her heart, the music note shining softly in the golden backstage light. She whispered, "I'll make you proud, Dad," as she closed her eyes, letting the memory of his voice calm her trembling soul. Professor Hale stood beside her, his face warm and proud. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he said softly. Lena smiled nervously. "A terrified girl?" she guessed. He chuckled. "No, I see a promise kept." Those words made her chest tighten. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then I'll keep it tonight." The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Lena Hensley, daughter of the late Arthur Hensley." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd as Lena stepped onto the stage. The spotlight bathed her in white, her figure small yet luminous against the vastness of the stage. She looked out into the sea of faces, and all waiting, expectant, curious, and in that moment, she realized something powerful. She wasn't just here to play her father's music. She was here to tell their story. She sat down before the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting her trembling hands. For a few seconds, the hall was utterly silent, not even a cough, not a whisper, only the sound of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She closed her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys, the same way she had done in that small cafe months ago. The same hunger, the same longing, but now mixed with strength and love. When she pressed the first note, it was like the world exhaled. The melody began softly, like a lullaby whispered to a sleeping child. Each note floated through the air, delicate and pure, wrapping around the audience like a warm embrace. As the song unfolded, the music grew deeper, fuller, filled with emotion, grief, hope, love, all woven together. Her fingers danced across the keys as if guided by something greater than herself. She could almost see her father's hands beside hers, moving in perfect harmony. The orchestra behind her joined in, strings swelling like waves, woodwinds whispering like memories. The sound rose higher, brighter, until it felt like the stars themselves were listening. Tears filled her eyes, but she kept playing, her soul pouring out with every note. Every key she pressed was a heartbeat, every chord a memory of hunger, of laughter, of loss, of rebirth. In the front row, people wept openly. A mother clutched her child's hand. A young man closed his eyes and smiled through tears. Even the critics sat frozen, pens forgotten, hearts trembling with emotion. The old piano that had once been her refuge was now her voice, strong, fearless, and full of truth. When she reached the final passage, the hall held its breath. The melody slowed, softening into a gentle whisper. Then came the last note, tender, lingering, fading into silence like the sigh of a soul finally at peace. For a long moment there was nothing. No sound, no movement, only stillness, and then thunder. Applause exploded through the hall. The audience rose to their feet, shouting her name, clapping until their hands burned. The sound filled every corner of the great hall, echoing through her very bones. Lena stood, tears streaming freely down her cheeks, her heart overflowing. She looked up toward the ceiling and whispered, "We did it, Dad." Professor Hale walked onto the stage, his eyes glistening with pride. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, whispering, "Arthur is smiling tonight." Lena smiled through her tears. I could feel him, she said softly. Every note was him. Reporters and photographers rushed forward. But she hardly noticed. In her heart, the only sound she could hear was the echo of her father's laughter, the memory of his voice saying, "Play with love. Lena, always with love." Later that night, after the crowd had left and the lights dimmed, Lena returned alone to the stage. The grand piano stood waiting in silence, bathed in the soft blue glow of the moonlight spilling through the tall windows. She ran her fingers gently over the keys, whispering, "You've taken me so far." Her reflection in the black surface stared back, no longer the frightened, hungry girl from the cafe, but a young woman who had turned pain into beauty. She sat once more and began to play softly, not for fame, not for an audience, but for herself and the man whose blood ran through her veins. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the streets of Vienna like a white blanket, muffling the world in peace. When she finished, she stood, turned to leave, and there, in the corner of the stage, she thought she saw him, a tall figure, faint and shimmering, smiling proudly. Arthur Hensley, her father, or perhaps just her heart remembering him. She didn't move, she didn't speak. She simply smiled back, tears falling silently, and as she walked out into the snowy night, she whispered, "You kept your promise, Dad, and now so have I." Back at her hotel, her phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from around the world, from fans, musicians, journalists. One stood out among them, a message from the cafe owner. It read, "We still have your piano. We'd love for you to come play again, this time as our guest of honor." Lena smiled, her heart full. "Yes," she whispered to herself. "I'll go back, because no matter how grand the stage, she would never forget where her song had begun, in a small cafe on a cold night, when she was just a hungry girl with a dream and a melody that refused to die." The day Lena returned to the cafe was bright and cold, the kind of morning that carried the crisp promise of something beautiful. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, melting on her coat as she walked down the same street where her journey had once begun. It had been almost a year since that night, the night she had walked in hungry, trembling and desperate, asking only to play for food. Now, as she stood in front of the cafe again, she felt her chest tighten, memories washing over her like a familiar song. The windows gleamed clean, the sign above the door freshly painted, and the same piano still stood by the corner window, polished, proud, waiting. But something else was new. A small bronze plaque above the instrument that read, "In honor of Lena Hensley, who taught us what music truly means." She smiled softly, tears gathering in her eyes. "They kept it," she whispered. When she pushed open the door, the little bell chimed, the same gentle sound that once made her heart race with fear. But this time the reaction was different. The same cafe that had once filled with laughter and mockery now filled with applause. People rose from their seats, clapping and cheering, their faces glowing with joy. The cafe owner hurried forward, smiling warmly. "Welcome home, Miss Hensley," he said, his voice trembling. "We've been waiting for this day." Lena laughed softly, wiping a tear. "Please just call me Lena," she said. "I was once just a hungry girl in your doorway, remember?" The owner lowered his head, ashamed. "And I'll never forgive myself for that," he said quietly. "You reminded us what kindness should sound like." Lena touched his shoulder gently. "Then we're both forgiven," she said kindly. Because music healed us all. As she looked around, she noticed familiar faces. The waiter who once mocked her now stood behind the counter, nervously straightening his apron. The woman with the red lipstick sat at a table near the front, clutching a bouquet of lilies, tears already in her eyes. And in the back corner, Professor Hale sat with his cup of tea. Smiling proudly, the cafe owner cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said loudly, "Lena has agreed to play for us today, not for food, but for love." Applause broke out again. Warm and full of life, Lena walked toward the piano, her heart fluttering, the sound of the crowd fading into the hum of memory. She sat down, running her hands lightly over the keys, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. Her pendant glimmered in the soft light, and she whispered, "For you, Dad, and for everyone who ever needed to be heard." When she began to play, the cafe transformed. The notes flowed like sunlight through open windows, filling every corner, wrapping around every heart. Her music was no longer sad, no longer broken, and it was alive, bright and full of gratitude. Each chord carried joy, forgiveness, and hope. The same people who had once laughed now smiled through tears, swaying softly as the melody washed over them. The waiter leaned against the counter, eyes closed, whispering, "It's beautiful." The woman with the lilies pressed them to her chest, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I'm sorry," though she knew she didn't need to say it anymore. Even passers-by stopped outside, listening through the window, drawn in by the haunting beauty of the song. As the final note faded, silence filled the room, a warm, peaceful silence that said everything words could not. Then the cafe erupted in applause once more. People standing, clapping, cheering, some even crying openly. Lena stood and bowed, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for giving me this moment." Professor Hale approached her, his eyes glistening. "You've come full circle, my dear," he said. "Your music began here and now it belongs everywhere." Lena smiled. "It's strange," she said. "I used to think this piano was my last hope, but it turned out to be my beginning." Hale nodded. "That's what real music does. It turns pain into rebirth." After the performance, people gathered around her, taking photos, asking for autographs. But Lena didn't feel like a celebrity. She felt like a storyteller, a keeper of melodies and memories. She sat down at one of the tables, laughing and talking with the people who had once ignored her. The waiter brought her a plate of warm bread and soup, the same meal she had once begged for. He placed it in front of her with shaking hands. "On the house," he said softly. Lena smiled and took a bite, the taste filling her with warmth and nostalgia. It wasn't just food, it was forgiveness. It was love, it was home. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Lena stayed behind. Sitting by the piano in the quiet cafe, the owner dimmed the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the window lamps. Outside, the snow continued to fall, the streets peaceful and silent. She began to play one last time, a soft lullaby her father used to hum before bedtime. The melody floated through the empty cafe like a memory come alive as she played. She closed her eyes and saw him again, her father sitting beside her, smiling proudly, his hands resting over hers. "You did it, my little Melody," his voice seemed to whisper. "You kept our promise alive." Lena's tears fell freely. But they were not of sadness. They were of peace, of love, of fulfillment. When the last note faded, she whispered, "I love you, Dad," and kissed the pendant softly. She stood, looking out through the window at the falling snow, the cafe glowing behind her like a beacon of hope. Her reflection stared back. No longer the girl who asked for food, but a woman who gave the world something far greater. Her journey had started with hunger, but it ended with harmony. And as she walked away that night, her footsteps light and her heart full, her music lingered behind her. It played softly in the hearts of everyone who had ever heard her story, a reminder that sometimes the smallest spark of courage can light the darkest path, and that even the most broken melody can become a symphony of hope. For Lena Hensley, the girl who once played for food, had become a legend, not because of fame or fortune, but because she never stopped believing that one song, played with love, could change the world.